Welcome back to another Minetest and modding tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at how to make dropdowns in your mods. Or in your Formspecs, rather. Formspecs in your mods. So here I have a mod I just finished writing the other day, and it has a dropdown in it. But we're going to start from scratch. So we will walk through all of the steps, and then once we're done with a basic one, we will go ahead and create something that's more advanced, which will pretty much just be a recreation of this mod here. So let's jump into things. All right, so obviously the basics, we need to create a form spec first. So we're gonna just do size, and I'm gonna go ahead and use 6x3. Obviously the size wouldn't matter, as long as it's large enough to contain all of the information you want to include. You'll have to forgive my poor typing skills because I can't see what I'm doing, although I'm usually a pretty good typist without seeing my keyboard anyway, until I get to like square braces and numbers. I don't know those quite so well. Text area, this is just gonna be an area where we have some text. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do, yeah, this is gonna be terrible. I don't know where commas are when I'm typing code because I'm moving my hands around a lot. And then we'll do a 4x2. So that'll be one inventory slot in and down, 4 wide, 2 tall. And then we'll just put a couple curly braces in, or semicolons rather. And then here we'll just put some text. So this can just say, this is the text above the dropdown. Obviously you don't even need that field, but it's helpful when you're putting a dropdown in to tell people what the dropdown's gonna do. So that's why we have that. And then we go to the dropdown. So we'll do dropdown, which lets the form spec know what type of element to draw. And we're going to actually put this at a height of 2, so it's below the text that we previously did. Semicolon to separate, and then the size of the dropdown. So I'm going to go ahead and do a 4x2, and actually I just realized that that'll be an issue. Although my text is so short, it probably wouldn't be. And then the name of the dropdown, so we're just going to go ahead and use dropdown. That is not forward facing, so you won't see it. And then a list of the options. So we'll just do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, etc., etc., etc. As many options as you want, all just comma separated. And then we will have the index. So if you want the field to be pre-populated with something, you put in an index. An index is a numerical value representing the option. So if we go with 1, Lua is a stupid language, so I don't know if this will give us the first entry. Technically, it should give us second as number 1 because arrays start at 0, but in Lua they don't. So I don't know, and I didn't look enough to find out. All right, so that is going to be a basic dropdown. We have the form spec defined here. It's just a super simple node, nothing special about it. When you build the node, or when you place it, it sets the form spec, and when you punch it, it places the form spec. So if there's an issue, you can just punch the node. It'll update the form spec. So for example, right now that's garbage. Here we go. This is text above the dropdown. So setting to an index of 1 gave me the first. If I set to 6th, you can see we have all of these options listed here. You can obviously only select from what is listed. Scroll with the mouse wheel on it. Arrow keys work as well, as long as it's selected. Or obviously you can click and select. So that gives you a drop box, but you can't really do anything with it as of right now, because we're not doing anything with this data. So we're going to need to add a callback to the node, and that's going to be a simple on on receive fields equals, oops, I don't know what that all did. Not what I wanted. Function, and that's going to get the position passed to it, the form name. We also have the fields. Fields are important. We're going to need those. And sender, that's going to be the person who clicked the button that made something happen. So we're actually going to want to go ahead and add a button so we can interact and save the data. So we will just go ahead and do a button exit. This will also close the form spec. If you want a save button that doesn't, I believe there is one that's just called button that won't exit the form spec. But in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and have it close the form spec. You know what, let's do that at 3 so it'll be closer to the bottom. And we'll go ahead and do this at 3 as well. And we'll just kind of see what that does. And then the width, we'll do a 2x1 button. That usually works pretty well for me. And then we need, this is going to be the internal string. So this will be the data that comes back to the engine. And then what's facing outward will be this string. So we'll see a save capitalized. You know, let's go ahead and do submit, just so it's a little more obvious and forward facing what's going on. This might crash, but it should be fine. Gonna go ahead and punch the node, which should update it. We now have a submit button. I can hit it, nothing happens, but it does exit the form spec. So that's good. The positioning could use some work. So maybe we'll put that to like 2.5, so it's a little bit higher, so it's not off the screen. But yeah. So let's go ahead and get this on receive field bit going here. So we're gonna need a few things. What are we going to need? Well, actually, we can start with, because we're just going really basic here, if fields. So fields is the data that's coming in, and we have a handful of different fields potentially. Oh wait, that's not how you do it. You do a table value. So if fields, and in this case it's going to be save, because up here that is our internal data that we pulled. So we'll use if field save. So this will be when you click the save button. Save is the data that's being received. You can also do it with dropdown. So every time you change the dropdown value, it saves the data. But I couldn't figure that out. So yeah, that's not what we're doing here. So if the field is saved, then we want to do something. So we are going to go ahead and just go really simple with the Minetest chat send all. And we just want to send a simple message saying dropdown value is, and then we will go ahead and do fields.dropdown. And then obviously we need an end there to, you know, close off the if. And we will go ahead and let's see what happens here. Punch it to update it, so our submit button is moved. And I know it's kind of hard to read, but in the corner here, it does say dropdown value is first. Change to the 6th, dropdown value is 6th. I don't think there's a way for me to make the chat text larger. So if you can't read it, just believe me that it is doing what it claims to be doing. It may be a little more legible here. So dropdown value is first, value is 6th, value is 4th. So whatever value we were setting it to is the value that's being pushed through when we hit save, which is what we want. So now we can use this and we could actually do something legitimate. And by so I mean more so legitimate than what we have here. So this is going to be a terrible example, but we could go ahead and do actually we would have to do, yeah, this is really bad. Don't do this. This is a terrible method, but this will work. So we're going to go ahead and do it. If fields dot dropdown equals 4th, then I don't know, what do we want to do if this is correct? Let's just go ahead and do Minetest remove node position. So if that's all right, theoretically, if we set the value to 4th and click save, it'll remove the node. Boom, it works. Okay. No, I said that's a really dumb method to do. You probably don't want to do that because you're just doing a bunch of if statements. And 4th is really not something very helpful to work with. Now, of course, it's going to depend on different circumstances. So, for example, in the mod I just finished writing, so it's a little more complicated, but basically we have the same kind of deal going on here. We have on receive fields, a field is save. We are setting some metadata on the node, it's particularly an integer and a string to the sound and the distance. And the sound is just a list of tables, a table of strings. And then the distance is just a numerical value 1 through 16. So we save those values to meta, and then that's actually used in another function. So, you can do that, but here more would be how this would be a worse way to do this. I don't know why I'm explaining worse ways of doing things, but for example, say you wanted this to be move this node X amount of spaces up. I don't know why you would want to do that. It's just an example, okay? So what you would have to do using this method, and you shouldn't use this method, and here's why, is you would have to do if field dropdown first, then Minetest remove node position, and then Minetest add node its own node at position plus position y1 or whatever to be one node above, and then you'd have to do the same thing else if position second, then remove the node and put the node 2 nodes above, etc., etc., etc. It makes for a lot of code duplication. So a better way would be to do something more along the lines of what's going on in here. So we do this fun little for function. Now, this doesn't actually just directly work. So, yeah, because it doesn't work. Let me explain what we need to change, and then we'll go ahead and change it. So here we're using a table because we're iterating through the table with the for I, sound index and I pair sound table. So basically, this is sound table up here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is that 7? Do I know how to count? Yeah, that's 7. We have 7 different entries. So say, for example, we selected grassland. That's the 4th option, right? So we have our for here, for I in sound index equals I pair sound table do. If sound index equals field sound, then meta set integer sound index to 1. Well, our first option, because this is starting at number 1, is going to be kind of furious force. Well, that's not right. So it's going to loop through again. Deciduous forest is second. Still not right. So it'll loop again. Desert, still not right. Going to loop again. Grassland. Okay, well, it finally reached to where sound index, which is grassland, equals field sound, because that's what the drop-down field was set to. So then, because that matches, it sets this integer to sound index equal I equals number 4, and now we have number 4 as an index value here. And that would work a cajillion times better than writing all of these ifs, because then all you have to do is get your value from that table. And so say it's 4th, it's 4, and then we do Minetest remove node, and then we would do another line of Minetest add node, node name, and then position would just be position.y plus I, and I would be 4. So if that didn't confuse you already, let's go ahead and try to confuse you now by writing all of this code. So we're going to go ahead and make that table. So we'll just do a local drop-down table, I suppose, because why not? You could put it within your curly braces right there. I just like doing it on its own line for no reason. I just think it looks nicer, but whatever, it doesn't matter. You're going to do each as strings, comma, separated here. So we're gonna just do this real quick. And yeah, I don't know why I typed size. Okay, so we now have a table with all of these values. We are going to go ahead and delete this line from here. And we're going to go ahead and use a neat little trick of using the table as the string here. So what we need to do is call table concat and then provide the table string, which is dropdown table. And then we also need to tell it what the things are between them, I guess, the separators. So because in our case we used commas between the numbers, we're going to do a comma. I suppose you could use a different character or not a character theoretically and just leave a space. Yeah, and that should still theoretically work. And we'll leave our index at 1, so it should still say first. We're going to go ahead and save this and, make sure the code works. Always good to make sure your code works at convenient places, which this doesn't. And we're attempting to call a string value in line 8. Dropdown table. Okay, what did I do wrong? Oh, of course, I forgot to put the 2 periods in. So the 2 periods do a thing called, I forget what, concatenation or something. I never know how to pronounce it. I always pronounce it wrong. Somebody will complain in the comments and give me the correct enunciation, and I'll forget it by the next time I need to say the word. But basically it takes this string, turns this into a string, inserts it within the middle of the string, and turns it into a valid string. Hopefully that's not too confusing. I'm going to go ahead and place this node, punch the node. Didn't actually have to punch it because it was just placed. And we'll see everything looks identical to before, which is good. We hit submit. It still does the same thing. I stupidly set it to 4th, so it deleted the node. That was kind of stupid of me. But okay, things are good. Still working. So let's come back over here. We have that table in. I'm going to, just to prove that this is actually working, we're going to go ahead and put 8th in, just because. So now we're going to leave our chat send all just so we know what our drop-down field value is. We're going to go ahead and write that for code block. I don't know what you call this. Is this a for loop, I suppose? Yeah, it'd be a for loop. So we have I as our integer, and then we have something that we're using as an index. And you could call this anything. This could be, I'm trying to think of something creative. It could be pencil. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. You can use whatever word you want. Doesn't make any difference. In I pairs, and then we need to provide that table, which is going to be drop-down table. That is a I pairs table, I guess. I don't have any sort of degree when it comes to code, which is probably extremely evident by now. We're going to go ahead and do a do. So we're just basically saying for every integer within the table pencils, or within the table drop down, and we're using, as we iterate through, we're going to call each option pencil. I don't know why, that's just what we're doing, because you can use whatever you want. And then we're going to do if, and because we chose pencil, so we're going to say pencil. Oh, I understand this now. I don't know why this took so long to come to me. This is a key and this is a value. So our key is 1, so our first entry is first. So pencil square bracket 1 would be first, pencil square bracket 2 would be second, pencil square bracket 3 would be third, or maybe it would be offset by 1. Probably not though, because again, Lua is stupid and starts raise at 1 because, forgets anything about any common programming language stuff. Let's just write our own rules. Okay, so if pencil equals, what was our field we were pulling in? Fields.dropdown. So again, we're just going through that table to find which one our selection is, matches up to which number it is in the table. So if pencil equals field dropdown, then obviously with an if, you have to have a then, otherwise it's not going to do anything. We're going to go ahead and do something with this value. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do chat send all. And we're going to go ahead and do index of table is, and we'll just put I. And this will pretty much just give us a numerical printout of the word that we already had, because we needed that. A couple end statements or whatever's. I don't know what those are called, to close off the ifs and the fors. And we are ready to check this code out. So technically you don't need to punch it because we didn't change did we change the form spec? Yeah, we did. So we'll go ahead and punch it. So now when we open it, it should go up to 8th. Hey, what do you know? And we'll submit it. And let me just pull up the chat window here. Drop down value is 8th because that's what we selected. Index of table is 8. So again, that's as it's looping through, it's counting each one, and number 8 obviously is number 8 in this instance. So we can go ahead and make things more advanced. So actually, let's go back to here, and you'll see we can set it to whatever value we want, and we hit submit. But every time we open it, it's showing first. Okay, maybe not a big deal. You know, maybe that's fine. Maybe it's not fine. Maybe you want to know what the selection was so you can show the previous selection when the form spec is opened again. You know, it could be nice to have. Because I got rid of the deleting code bit. Okay, it doesn't do that. Let's make it do that, because this is actually a useful thing to have happen, because it's what the user expects. So we are going to go ahead and save some stuff in metadata. We're going to go ahead and turn the form spec into a function. Fun things. So we will start with the metadata. There's really no points in getting the metadata if they're not clicking the save button. So we'll put it inside of here. Local meta equals Minetest get meta with the position. And then, I mean, technically we don't have to do any of that till down here, but I like putting my locals up towards the top of where they're initially needed. You could put it anywhere, it doesn't matter. And then we're just going to do a meta set int. It's going to be an integer. You could do a string as well. It probably really doesn't matter too much. And we're just going to call this index, because it's the index, it's the number. So that's what we're calling it. And then we need to provide it with a value to actually set. So this is the key index, and our value is going to be I. I, again, is going to be the number of which entry in the table is selected. So we're saved on that. That's all good. But now we need to take this index and somehow use it in place of this 1 here. So I'm going to go ahead and backspace the 1, and we're going to put an index variable in here. And we're going to have to change this form spec over, because we need to be able to dynamically update it by using this index value. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this a local function, and we'll just call the function form spec dropdown. And we're going to be passing an index value to it. And then we're going to have, I think we have to call that a local form spec. And we define our form spec here. And then once we're done, we return the form spec. So that way, whatever called this function gets a form spec back that uses whatever value we passed to the function as the index here. And then after we return the form spec, we also need an end to close out the function. So now we will change our meta set string in the onConstruct and onPunch. So we will just change this to formspec underscore dropdown. And we can provide any arbitrary index we want. So if we want our default value to be first, we can set 1. If we want the default value to be fourth, we can set 4. Can use whatever we want. And then here, we'll just paste it. But we're actually going to do something different here. Here we're going to pass the index. And in order to get the index, what we're going to do is do local index equals meta get int. And the integer we want to retrieve is index. So now this will pull index from here and put it into this function, which will update the form spec. And if everything works right, it'll work. This is a poor method of doing it. We'll get to the better method of doing it in one moment. So we have the value set to 5th. We hit submit. chat all comes through right. It still says first here though. That's kind of annoying. But if we punch it, I was gonna say it should work, but clearly I have a spelling error. I sure do. Formspecs. Yeah. Helps if you know how to spell. All right, so that should be rectified now. Let's give her another shot. We'll punch it, and our option is now fifth. We'll set it to second. Submit. We'll open it, and still says fifth. We'll punch it. It says second. So that's swell, right? That's dandy. That's great. That's superb. But that's really, really annoying. I don't want to have to punch a node before I can right-click on it to open the form spec. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to just get rid of all that on-punch stuff. You know, we don't need that. And we're going to change it over to an on-right-click. And on-right-click is going to need a few function, variable. I think those are variables passed to the function. Position, the node, the clicker. That's kind of all I mean, technically we don't even need the clicker, but I'll go ahead and include the clicker. It also could have item stack and pointed thing, but we're not going to interact with those at all. So those don't, I mean, for this example, we're not even going to interact with the node or the clicker, but I'll throw out some samples that you may want for something. So we're going to go ahead and retrieve the metadata. So we're going to do local meta equals Minetest get underscore meta, and we'll pull that from the position. And then we're also going to get our local index equals, and same as in the on punch, we're going to get that from meta gets integer of index. So now we have the index value there, and then we're going to go ahead and do meta set string, and we're going to be doing Formspec. I should learn to spell that right. And we're going to go ahead and do our function here, and here we will pass it the index variable that we just created a line above, and then of course we need to close that callback out with an end. So while we're doing, when we right click it, we get the metadata, we get the index, which was saved when we clicked the save button here, and then we set the string to the index. Now, because you're going to right click this once before you ever can click save, you may want to go ahead and do a meta set int up here of index and throw that to whatever value you want. So we have value 4. So the first time when we right click it, there is an index to retrieve. It'll work without it. I'll just close it out, just as an example here. We'll go ahead and delete that node, replace it. But it'll start with a nil value, so it just won't show anything at all. But now every time thereafter, it will show something. I have a feeling I spelled eighth wrong. E-I-G-H-T-H. Yeah, that's spelt wrong. Ignore the misspelling. We'll throw something that's spelt right. So that's working. So I'm going to go ahead and go back here, and we'll uncomment it out. So our default value will be 4. Technically, because of the on right click now, we can actually get rid of that because we're not actually ever viewing the form spec that was set there, because it gets reset when we do an on right click. Now you could also use an on right click, and you could do a Minetest, Minetest show form spec player name, which you would get from clicker. But that makes things a little more tricky to keep track of the node's position, and you have to do some table stuff with the player name as a key and then the position as the value, and it's a little more involved. But you could do that as well, and that would save on writing node metadata back and forth to nodes a whole bunch. I don't know what kind of performance impact that really has, so I don't know if it makes any difference. But yeah, there is that. So now we also have the ability, because we've saved an index, we can do things with this index. So we could do, I don't know, what kind of a callback would we have that would use a timer? I guess let's go ahead and do this. This is just getting into the stupid territory, but local timer equals Minetest get node timer. Is that what it's called? I don't think it is. Let me find out real quick. This is get node underscore timer. Okay. Position. Okay. And then we're just going to go ahead and do timer start 4 because that's what we set our value to here. So now we can go ahead and do an on timer equals function position. And we're going to go ahead and do a local meta equals Minetest get meta position. And then we're also going to do local index equals meta get int index because, oops, that needs to be done like that. So now we have our index, and now we can go ahead and do, we're going to actually go ahead and get a timer again. Local timer equals Minetest get node timer position. And then we're going to also go ahead and do Minetest chat send all timer ran. And then we're going to do timer start index. This is a stupid example. Don't actually write code like this, but this is just to show how you would actually use this in a functional fashion. Because sending a chat message to somebody telling them, hey, this is what button you clicked. I mean, come on, that's kind of stupid. So we have this. I need to actually destroy that and replace it. There we go. So now the timer has started, I hope. And we get a chat message saying timer ran. And theoretically, every 4 seconds, we will get a chat message saying timer ran. Because every 4 seconds, that's what the drop-down value is set to, right? So let's go ahead and drop this drop-down value to 8th. We'll hit submit. And oops, we'll pull up the chat dialog here. And now theoretically, every 8 seconds, okay, 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6 1000. I feel like that one at 6 1000, I was probably counting too slow. But yeah, the timer ran. So that was every 8 seconds. Let's go ahead and make it run every second. Why not, right? Now we do have to wait for that previous 8 seconds to finish before the new length of time starts. Now you see the timer is running every second. I mean, admittedly, this timer is 100% useless because it just sends a chat message saying the timer ran. But you could make it, actually do something. For example, you could make it that every time the timer runs, it shoots off a firework particle. So you could do a particle system for fireworks. And you could have a drop-down. How often should it shoot fireworks off, Or you could do something with time. How often should the bell chime? Every second? That would admittedly be quite a bit too frequently. So what you may want to do in that case, because after all, index is just a number, we could go ahead and do index times 4. And that way, it's so hard to really demo this well because, we're looking at chat messages. We have the timer, or our drop-down set to 1, but it's actually being multiplied by 4. So now it's every 4 seconds the timer runs. And if we put this all the way up to 8th, it'll be every 32 seconds that the timer runs. So we can pull this up again and sit around and wait for 32 seconds. Because that's fun. And eventually, after 32 seconds, we'll get a new chat message in here saying the timer ran. Super useful. Super high recommend doing this. I don't actually recommend doing this because having a chat message that just says a timer ran is pretty pointless. But there you can see it just ran. That was just to demonstrate that your index is just a numerical value. So anything you could do with a number, you can do with index. You can multiply, divide, floor, max, multiply. I said multiply, yeah. Add, subtract. You can use it as a value in a position. So, you know, you have position, and you could break that down into the 3 vectors, x, y, and z, and you could add 4 to whichever vector, and you could say, you know, I want this node to put a node 4 nodes in the air above it. It could do that. And you can manipulate anything with your index. It's just a number. So that's essentially how your dropdowns would work. You know, you can do things, because this is, after all, a table. So we can put spaces in here. We could do cool story, bro. As long as exclamation points don't break Formspecs, which I don't see that they should. So we'll go ahead and open this back up. And hey, look at that. We now have third option. We have cool story, bro. Like, how neat is that? And then again, these are still, because this table is completely disconnected. Well, I shouldn't say disconnected, but the entries in the table it's referenced to the table everywhere it's used. So you can adjust this table. You can say, you know what, we only want 6 options now instead of 8. And you could change that, and everything else will dynamically update to work with it. You know, now there's only 6 options in here. The Formspec's only going to show these options from in this table. When you hit save, it'll iterate through that table. You don't need to change anything here. The only thing you ever have to change is your drop-down table. So, I mean, that's pretty neat. And of course, you could do multiple drop-downs if you want. Going back to the mod that I wrote, where I kind of learned how to do all this stuff. I have 2 drop-downs. We have one of the sounds table, which is using this table because these are strings and I need to get them into a numerical value. And then the drop-down second one here is doing a volume set. So I have 1 through 16 as different volumes, and those are both used same as before in the onReceive fields. So we have, when you hit save, we set the sound to field sound, which is actually the string here. And that's important because we actually use these strings. These are sound names. And then we set the distance to that second number, field's distance. But then we also save the sound index, which is what the for loop does here to find the numerical value. And we do that because when you right click on this node, I want to show the index and the distance. So that way, if it was set to, we'll say desert, every time you click on this, right click on this node, it'll be pre-populated with desert. So you'll know what the old value was. So if you're opening it up because you just want to change the volume, you don't have to reselect your original sound. Of course, this is, you know, assuming that you're having a table that would, or drop-down menus that do something similar to this. You could be not doing that. But yeah, here's the kind of the more practical part of it. So there's the data being stored and everything, and then how that data is actually used. I have an ABM that runs. It runs on these specific nodes that have the drop-down menus. We get the meta, we get the sound from the sound string, we get the distance from the distance integer, and then we just call a Minetest sound play, and we play the sound, which is whichever sound entry in this table. These are all the file names of different sounds that are available to this mod. And then the distance is, again, just the distance, 1 through 16. So we play that sound at the node's own position and give it a max here distance of whatever the distance was. So that's, you know, one practical way that you could use something like this. Of course, you could use it for a whole host of other things. Literally anything that can take a user-defined input, you could use your drop-down inputs for. This is kind of an easy way to, what's the way to politely word this? This is an easy way to make sure people aren't idiots and don't put in invalid data. So say, for example, you have something that there's 5 different options, right? There's 5 different things somebody could select. And you could just give them a list and say, hey, type in whichever one you want. But what happens when you get that idiot who types in something that's not one of the valid values? Well, now you have to have some kind of error handling code where you just ignore the input, and then I go, why isn't this working? Kind of really trash talking users here, but I mean, developers are watching this, not users, so I think we're fine, right? You can keep my secret. So if you do drop down, well, there's no option for them to put in cool story, bro, exclamation, exclamation, because, well, your only option is 3 exclamations. So I don't need to handle any other inputs because you can't put any other inputs in. It's kind of a security measure for myself, so I don't need to have error handling. Of course, that's not to say you should just ignore error handling now and make your mod crash. You, of course, should still implement proper error handling in the proper areas, but this does help keep things just a little bit easier because now there's only specific options a user can use. So that's that kind of wraps up the drop downs here. We'll just go ahead and I guess pull this back up for the outro here. So there you go, drop downs in Formspecs. Themable, of course, or I shouldn't say themable, but movable. You can change the widths and the heights. So like if you had really long strings, you could go longer. Mine are pretty short, so I honestly could have gone half the width. But, you know, you can do whatever. And then, yeah. You can deal with the player input that way. And that's it. That's the tutorial. So hopefully this was helpful. It didn't go on too long. I actually don't know how long it went. Hopefully, yeah, I didn't make any horrendous mistakes that you're going to hate me forever for. This was recorded specifically for somebody, and I don't remember who you were. I'm sorry. But you left a comment like 3 days ago asking about it, and here's your video. So you're welcome. And for everybody else, you're welcome. If there's a tutorial you would like to request, feel free to do so in the comments, and I'll do my best to make a tutorial for you. That's going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.